Hello and welcome to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Tyler, and today we will touch on the Orioles clinching their first ever 4-game sweep of the Tampa Bay Rays at Tropicana Field. But the vast majority of today's show is going to focus on a negative for the Baltimore Orioles. And I know it sucks to focus on a negative when the team is playing so well, but I do want to touch on something that I think a lot of people in Birdland are concerned about right now, and that is the play of Cedric Mullins, our former all-star center fielder, gold glove contender. Cedric Mullins has not had a very good season so far. We'll get into that in just a second. But before I do that, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor for the episode this week, and that is, of course, betonline.ag. I want to remind you guys that BetOnline is your number one source for the NBA Finals and Stanley Cup Finals this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Now, when the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. So head to the website today. That's betonline.ag to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, the game starts here. Thank you to Bet Online for the support. So let's move on here to the main topic of the episode, which is Cedric Mullins. So if you guys head over to CamdenChat.com, where I'm a writer, I put up my analysis piece of the week, which I'll say was not a unique thought in the Orioles blogosphere this week. I saw a post on the Baltimore Sun about it. Seen a lot of people talking about it in comment section, so I'm certainly not the only one to have this thought. But Cedric Mullins has had a really rough season this year. So if you just look offensively, I'm on baseballreference.com looking, or baseball-reference.com right now, looking at his numbers. They are pretty grim, and these numbers are updated through the Tampa Bay series, which ended on Monday night with a win, which that's huge. That's important context, which I do want to put here, is that the Orioles are winning baseball games. They're winning a lot of baseball games. Yes, they're not in first place in the division. The Yankees are, because they're playing at an even slightly more ridiculous clip. But the Orioles are winning a ton of games, on pace for like 100 and something wins, on pace to make the playoffs, potentially win the division, because they do get to play the Yankees a bunch more this season. But that's important context here, is that the Baltimore Orioles are playing very good baseball with Cedric Mullins playing at the current clip he is. But that does not mean that there's not room for improvement throughout the roster, but specifically in center field, where Cedric Mullins is just currently a black hole in the lineup right now. It's very ugly. So let's look at his season long numbers, which are, he's played in 59 games. He's batting 174 with a 222 on base and a 310 slugging. He's got 6 home runs, 3 doubles, 2 triples. He has struck out 51 times to only 11 walks, and he does have 13 stolen bases on 15 attempts. Only been thrown out twice this year, which that is the part of his game that's really been excellent. This year, it's been better than a season ago, where he wasn't quite as aggressive. Last year, he stole only 19 bases on 22 attempts, so the success rate was similar, but the volume was far lower, which is notable because he was on base a lot more last year. So, right now, when Cedric's getting on base, he's running. He's running basically a quarter of the time. If you combine his 11 walks with his 32 hits, that's 43 opportunities. I'm sure he's gotten on base a couple times from sacrifice, or I'm sorry, errors, and, potentially fielder's choices or whatever. But if we're keeping it simple, he's been on base there 43 times and has 13 stolen bases. So over a quarter of the time, he's going to successfully steal a base, which is great. That's a weapon, and that's an important part of the conversation here. But the other part is getting on base, period, which has really been an issue for him. Only a 222 on base, not good. I think if you go look at his game logs, which are important, through April, he had his 6 home runs. And at that point, at the end of April, he was batting 219, 274 with a 427 slugging. And that was kind of at a point where you said, all right, the batting average and the on base kind of stink, but this is not Cedric Mullins, the leadoff hitter, anymore. He had been demoted from that, last season. He's now hitting in the, mid to bottom of the order. He started the season batting 7th, moved up to 6th, 5th a lot. But in general, 6, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there is where Cedric Mullins is in. So you can take the lower batting average, lower on base, because it was coming with that power. I mean, a 701 OPS, which is a 427 slugging plus the 274 on base. 701 OPS is not fantastic, but it's solid. It's good, especially if this is like your 6th best hitter in the lineup. You're definitely going to take that on this team. But since then, which is the start of May, he is batting 125 with a 163 on base and a 182 slug. So now the numbers are just ridiculously awful. He has only 3 extra base hits since the start of May, and that's 1 double, 2 triples. He has no home runs. He's walked 4 times, struck out 28 times. And simply put, that is just not good enough at the major league level. You can deal with slumps, you can deal with down years, but you can't deal with being less than a 0 even at the plate. If you look at his OPS plus, which is kind of the league average there is 100 to kind of normalize it, so you can get an easy glance at a number and tell you the production that this player is putting up relative to the league. 100 is average. Mullins is at 54. So he is producing at 54% the rate of a major league average hitter, which is atrocious. And his baseball reference WAR on the season is exactly 0.0, which that doesn't mean that he's replacement level. That means he's sub-replacement level. He is a person that is not competing at the major league level right now at the plate. You could bring up a guy from AAA who you might say is a quad A type player, and you could bring them up and offensively, at least in the batter's box, they could do exactly what Cedric Mullins is doing. Now, as I said, he's stealing bases. He's stealing a lot of bases. 13, he's not leading the league or anything, but 13, you could expect him to steal around 30 bases at that clip right now. We're not quite halfway through the season. He's more than, he's almost to 15 right now. You could expect him to if he continues playing this much, to steal 30 or more bases, which is fantastic. His his career high for a single season was 34 in 2022. And of course, he stole 30 the year before when he went 30-30 with 30 home runs and 30 stolen bases. So the offensive production for Mullins is just not there, not going to cut it, not going to work. Then you go on defense, and that's where he really shines, right? I don't think he was a Gold Glove finalist last year. That was a whole thing that he should have been a Gold Glove finalist. And I tend to agree. Mullins was really fantastic in the field last year. Last year, we'll remind everybody, was really good offensively to start the year, then had the leg injury, really struggled when he came back from the IL the first time, went back on the IL, continued to really struggle after the second IL stint, and really was quite bad down the stretch. But the entire time, hurt or not, his defense was really excellent the entire time. Specifically his range, obviously. We know he doesn't have the strongest throwing arm, although I think that gets, a little bit more maligned than it deserves. It's certainly not a good arm, but it's not the weakest. It's not a Johnny Damon-esque arm. This is a guy that, he doesn't look completely out of place on a Major League Baseball field throwing a baseball, whereas Johnny Damon, it looked like he just never played catch with anybody. He was like, had dinosaur arms when he was throwing the ball. It looked like he was short arming it every time. It was atrocious, but obviously very good offensive player in his heyday. Anyway, back to Mullins. The range was spectacular last year. So that's kind of the argument there is, okay, he's not hitting, but he's stealing bases, so that's a plus. And defensively, he is, you would say, one of the absolute best defensive center fielders in the league. So yeah, he's not hitting, but if he's stealing bases and playing Gold Glove level defense, you can swallow that sort of black hole, like I said, of offensive horror at the bottom of your lineup. And sure, I think there's an argument to be made there, but I'm not so sure that Cedric Mullins right now is that elite, absolute elite, top range type of center fielder anymore. If you go to Baseball Savant, which look, defensive statistics are not, something you just take wholeheartedly. You've got to take them with a grain of salt. They take longer to normalize than offensive statistics. So this is him through a 59 game sample. And we have a track record of Cedric Mullins being fantastic. So I'm not going to take what he's put together in these 59 games when he potentially is hurt, which is, we'll talk about that in a second. I'm not going to take that and say this guy's washed when we've seen, 5 years of him being very good, and especially the last, 2 or 3 being spectacular. I'm not going to wash that all away. But if you go to Baseball Savant and look at his fielding metrics, they are fine, in some respects good. They are certainly not elite. His range, which they use outs above average to measure, is just 2 outs above average, which is good. That's in the 78th percentile of outfielders, which is good, which is solidly above average, but that would be easy to swallow if your guy is putting up average-ish numbers at the plate. Maybe even 80 OPS plus, 90 OPS plus. When you have a 54 OPS plus, you have to have a saving grace of outstanding, elite, head and shoulders above the rest defense. And I'm not so sure that 29-year-old Cedric Mullins in his current state is that. Now, again, that's outs above average. We know his arm is good to bad, good to below average, I'll say. We certainly know his arm is not a strong suit of his. So if you look at Baseball Savant, they have him as an about average arm. He's in the 43rd percentile of arm value and 52nd percentile of arm strength, which has him averaging his max throws at a little under 85 miles per hour. So you got good above average range, average arm. That is a slightly above average fielder paired with a horrific bat at the moment. That's not a player I think that you want in your lineup every single day. Now, talk about his range for a second. Why is it good rather than great as it was last year? Because if we look at last year, he was worth 6 outs above average. Now, that's over the entire season. So I think you'd expect him to be at about 3 right now, 3 to 4 to get to that 6. Because last year he only played in 120 games, I want to say. I have to look. 116 last year. So he's more than halfway. He's played 59 games this year. He's more than halfway to that 116 that he got 6 outs above average last year. So you'd expect him to already be at 3, potentially on his way to 4, and we're just a little touch below that right now. You look at his sprint speeds, there is evidence of some regression, negative regression there in terms of his running. Let me find it here. He is clocked in at his average max sprint speed of 27.8 feet per second, which again is above average. It's, I think, a little bit below average for a center fielder, but last year he maxed at 28 feet per second. Excuse me. The year before that, 28.5 feet per second, and the year before that also 28.5 feet per second. And you kind of get the gist from there. He's slowing down bit by bit, year after year. Which, look, he's a human being that's getting into his late 20s, early 30s. That's what happens. I'm 31 myself. I don't run as fast as I did when I was 18. That's what happens. But with Mullins, it's an important part of his game defensively. We see that he's stealing bases, and we talk about that all the time, that stealing bases is not as simple as being fast. We've had fast Orioles before. Ryan McKenna, a recent Oriole that was fast. I think maybe faster than Mullins at this point in his career. Obviously didn't play very much, but even when he was on base, was never really a stolen base threat because he just, maybe he couldn't read the pitcher. He didn't feel comfortable. He was a player that certainly didn't have a rock solid roster spot. So you're not going to go out and then risk that, tenuous position you have by stealing when you weren't told to steal. So there's all kinds of elements there, but there's more to stealing bases than just being fast. And Mullins is a guy that just knows how to steal bases. So he doesn't necessarily need absolutely elite speed, and he certainly doesn't have elite speed anymore. But it is kind of an indication of a physical regression that's going on there. What else is a physical regression that's happening? Well, his average exit velocity is down quite a bit as well. Right now, this season, it's at 88.3 miles per hour. Last year, it was at 88.9 miles per hour. The year before that, 88.8 miles per hour. And the year before that, 89.4 miles per hour. So again, we're seeing bit by bit, he's slowing down just a little bit. And all of those things sort of add up to what we're seeing right now, where you're not running as fast. you're not getting to as many balls in the outfield to sort of downgrade your position as elite center fielder. You're not quite that right now defensively. You talk about lowered exit velocities, and you pair that with a launch angle, which has only increased. Last year was his highest average launch angle of 21.6 degrees. This year it's up to 21.7 degrees. And his max exit velocity, which was he maxed out at 110.5 miles per hour last year. That was the hardest he's ever hit a ball in his career. This year, the hardest he's hit a ball is 106.4 miles per hour. Now, max exit velocity is cherry picking a little bit, and I'm sure part of his issue this year with not getting higher than that, because the max exit of 106.4 miles per hour is quite low for his entire career. He's usually maxed out at like 109 in a season. Even that 2019 season when he really struggled and got sent down to AA, he maxed out at 110.3. So I don't think that the max exit velocity you need to take as he's never going to reach 109 miles per hour again off the bat, but it's an indication of a combination of things, which is lowered strength, potentially lowered power. Timing is off because he's not barreling up the ball nearly as much this season as he did a season ago. He's only got 5.2% barrel rate. Last year was 6.5%. So there's just a couple of factors there that kind of show, all right, there's some physical limitations going on there. So that could either be he's getting older, as I just said, 29 going on 30, or there is an injury afoot that the Orioles have not put him on the IL for. We know he had the 2 leg injuries last year. We know in the spring he suffered, I believe, a hamstring pull that he sat for, I think, a week or so, then bounced back. And, he had a very good April. I wouldn't say a very good. He had a fine April offensively. So I think we assumed he's over it. But some of these numbers now are indicating that he's not, something is wrong. Something is wrong. We know he struggled down the stretch last year, but ultimately his production for the whole season sort of echoed what he had done in 2022. His defense still looked good, and there's a lot of positive to take from that. But this season, we're seeing downgrades pretty much across the board. So to me, knowing that Cedric Mullins has a track record, at least since 2019, when we know he had issues, but 2020, 21, 22, 23, that's 4 seasons of really good baseball from Cedric Mullins, some extremely good baseball in some cases. Those types of players don't typically fall off a cliff at 29 years old. They might in their mid 30s. We know he's a guy that relies on speed a lot, but even still, you'd expect a little bit better production this year if he is indeed healthy, which leads me to believe that he probably is not entirely healthy. So what do? Do you keep trotting the guy out there? The Orioles are certainly trying that. He's just playing day after day. They're lowering him in the order. They are taking him out for pinch hit opportunities. Sometimes they are keeping him on the bench against lefties, and they're putting Colton Cowser out there in center field. But they're not making any drastic decisions on him because, to me, I would think they just value his leadership, his defensive ability, and on top of that, they must not have any indication from Mullins himself that he's hurt, or else they would do something. Austin Hayes early in the season, we know in spring training Austin Hayes had some illness that he worked through, lost a couple pounds on, had to sit down for a couple days, and then kind of missed a lot of his spring training. He said was really rough to start the season. Had an IL stint for, I forget what that injury was, but I can't say it's totally unrelated to just not really being fully in shape to start the season because you missed out on part of spring training. Has come back, and although he's still dealing with some injury stuff, has looked really good since coming off the IL. Hit his first 2 home runs, and whether that IL stint was as long as it needed to be, maybe a little bit longer, maybe it was not so much a physical issue as a mental issue of sitting down and putting things in perspective. I don't know. But whatever it was, we know he's come back looking much better. Last season, Ryan Mountcastle obviously had a legitimate issue with the vertigo, which, we understand can be debilitating, and his numbers were really poor to start the season. He takes the IL stint, works through his rehab stint, comes back, and pretty much since then, Ryan Mountcastle's been fantastic. He's certainly, not an MVP level type of player, but he's a guy that's going to hit home runs. He's going to hit the ball hard. He's gonna make things happen on the bases with his sneaky speed. Mountcastle's been really good since that IL stint, and I'm sure there's a physical part of that. There's a mental part of it. Baseball seasons are a grind. There are aspects of it that you know you have to pace yourself a little bit, and you can't always do that if you're playing day after day. We know the Orioles have been cautious with their pitchers this season. It hasn't worked entirely because, well, not Tommy John, but UCL injuries from Tyler Wells and John Means. But we know that they've skipped starts or pushed back Kyle Bradish a couple times to take care of his elbow. Grayson Rodriguez had a brief IL stint. Really, the only guy that they're pushing time after time is Corbin Burns, and that's because he's one, a rental, and two, a veteran horse who's going to be entering free agency. And I'm sure from his perspective is, if I'm feeling good and I can keep going and I can potentially win a Cy Young, that's going to be a big old payday for me in the winter. So, yeah, I don't need any time off, boss. But thanks for asking. But Mullins is not a guy that's hitting free agency. This is a guy that we know has 30-30 potential. He's done it before, but this season something is not quite working for him. So potentially it's something physical. Maybe it's mental. I don't think he's over the hill. I just think right now he's not playing up to his abilities for whatever reason. So what are the options there for the Orioles? Well, one is an IL stint if there's something there that the Orioles or Mullins or whomever believes could be sorted out. Maybe he's got his leg issues still. Maybe there's something else bothering him that he needs to take some time off and address. If not, and the Orioles are concerned enough about all elements of his game, well, they can send him to the minor leagues if they want to. It's odd to see a guy who is, 29 years old that has been in the big leagues steady for 4 years. But we know, back in 2019 when it was basically time for the Orioles to move on from Adam Jones. Adam Jones had already left the team that offseason after rebuffing a trade the year prior, gone to the Diamondbacks. Mullins kind of became the center fielder for the team and really struggled early in that season. Was, the worst hitter in baseball, maybe aside from Chris Davis. It was Cedric Mullins. He was really dreadful. And the organization sent him all the way down to Double-A. And, I'm sure that was a kick to the gut, but he took it in stride, bounced back, and became an all-star 2 years later, and is now the player we think of today as a really good, above-average center fielder. But just for whatever reason right now is not playing to that level. But the point being that Mullins has two MLB options, minor league options left that the Orioles can use, and he has no say over it. Now, I think you want to consult a veteran before you do something like that. You want to take his temperature a little bit and see if it's going to completely destroy him mentally. You don't want to just do that willy-nilly, but the Orioles do have that in their back pocket that if they think, hey, Cedric, we think you are very important to our 2024 outlook, but we can't get where we want to go with you playing at this level. We need you to be a step above this. We need you to be, this current defense you're giving us is good enough. I think his defense and his stolen base ability, that is good enough. And we don't expect you at the plate to be 2021 Mullins, who's hitting 30 home runs and stealing 30 bases necessarily and being arguably the best center fielder in baseball. But we need you to be a major league average hitter in the ballpark at least. And right now you just are not that. You are walking less than you ever have. You're striking out more than you ever have. Something's got to change. And that might require you to take a little bit of a reset there. What I don't think the Orioles should be doing is what some, I think, more boisterous fans are saying, which is cut bait, trade him. I don't know. I don't know what world you're trading him. What team is taking Cedric Mullins right now and giving you back anything of any value? There's no logic in a trade of Cedric Mullins right now. So get that out of your brain entirely. You could cut bait, but then that makes absolutely no sense either because you have a guy who's a former All-Star who's not even 30 years old yet that has talent within him. That makes no sense either. So any scenario in which Cedric Mullins is not a Baltimore Oriole through the end of 2024 is illogical, and I won't even hear it. But you do have to do something to get him right. I don't think that you can just let him play through the string at this point. It's not been a bad 2 weeks or even a month. I mean, his April wasn't great, but it was okay. He's now at basically a month and a half plus, and I think you could even say that first month of April wasn't fantastic. So if you want to say the first 2.5 months of the season, which is more than a third of the season, has been bad, then you're not having a bad start. You're just having a bad year. And this is an extremely bad year for Cedric Mullins, but he is too talented, I think, for the Orioles to just let him keep banging his head against the wall like this. So what I would love to see, personally, what my preferred setup would be an IL stint. I just can't believe that this guy has physically diminished to the point where he can't catch up with big league fastballs, because that's what he's getting a lot of, are fastballs up in the zone. I can't believe that this guy who's got so much experience, so much talent, can just suddenly not hit a major league fastball. Something feels like it's wrong to me. So what I would love is an IL stint personally. Get off your legs for a week, 2 weeks, then take an IL stint, or take a rehab stint rather. Go to Bowie or Norfolk or whatever makes the most sense, and see some pitching, see some worse pitching. Take some complex versions of batting practice here. Yeah, you might struggle there too because you haven't seen pitching in 2 weeks. Whatever. Take your lumps. Take 2 weeks. Climb it back up. And then when you come back, buddy, the center field job is yours again. We're not giving the center field job to anybody, because what are the alternatives there? The alternatives are Colton Cowser. That's essentially the alternative, is Colton Cowser. Now, Colton Cowser, metrics love him from a defensive standpoint. He's got 8 outs above average. Remember, Cedric Mullins has 2. Now, Cowser's played a lot of left field, but Oriole Park's left field is cavernous. That is an impressive left field to track balls down in. And he's played a little bit of center field, I think done a nice job. Is showing off one of the strongest throwing arms in baseball, averaging 95 miles per hour on his throws, his hard throws home, not just his lobs in, but fantastic. He's rating out as faster than Mullins at 28 feet per second. That's translating obviously to his outs above average. So Colton Cowser, I think, can step in and do a fine job, but then, that opens up left field. And I think Austin Hayes can step in there, do a job. Kyle Stowers can come in. I think you could have a lefty-righty platoon maybe of Hayes and Stowers if you want to try that for a little bit. Norby is around, has played some left field. I know they don't love him defensively, so maybe that's not viable long-term, but that's there. There are things you can do to plug holes for Mullins, but I think ultimately, once he is back and in action, I want Cedric Mullins in center field. I want Colton Cowser in left field. I want Austin Hayes to shuffle in where he can, give, Santander a break in right field, have Hayes play out there. For me, that's what I've wanted the whole season. Coming into the season was Hayes and Mullins, Santander, and Cowser rotating in, giving guys days off. I think there's enough talent there to make it work, but the Orioles haven't really employed that to this point. It's mostly been, since Hayes got hurt and Hayes really struggled, was Cowser left, Mullins center, Santander right. Sometimes O'Hearn comes in right. I would love to see more of a shuffle there. We've seen Cowser start the season really hot. He's struggled a little bit more recently, but obviously has physical skills that some of the other guys don't have. So shuffle him in where you can. Get Mullins off his feet a little bit more often. Get Hayes off his feet a little bit more often. We know he's a guy that's had injury stuff prior to last season. So I think that's a viable option. But I don't think you clear things out and say, all right, Cedric, you're in our past now. Like, yeah, we don't want to lose you because we know you have talent, but the center field job is going to be Colton Cowser's for right now. And if you can work your way back in, that's great. I wouldn't approach it that way. I'd say you need some time off to get your head right, to get your body right. But don't worry, the center field job is yours when you come back. But just take 2 or 3 weeks. Take a week, just sit, relax, and then take your rehab stint, get back up here, and we'll all be better for it. It's baffling to see a guy kind of bang his head against the wall for this long and there not be some kind of physical ailment. So yeah, I felt like I wanted to put on an episode about that. I know the Orioles swept the Rays, took all 4 games, was fantastic. I think the Rays are really bad this year. Their record doesn't indicate that they are an atrocious team, but a lot of their peripheral stats say their offense is absolutely horrible, which, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B this series, where the Orioles pitchers were, I think, fantastic, but the Rays are bad. And the Orioles beat them. They took all 4 games on the road for the first time ever at Tropicana Field. That there's no, I don't want to understate that at all. That's impressive feat against even the worst teams in the league, which the Rays are not excuse me, the Rays are not the worst team in the league, but they're bad. The Orioles are now 6-1 against them this year. Really impressive. Now we've got the Atlanta Braves in town for a big series. Obviously not a huge series in a head-to-head sense. It doesn't really impact things too much, but the Braves are a good team, not quite as good as they were a season ago, and they don't have Acuna anymore. But that'll be an exciting series. So interested to watch that for sure. But I just feel like we need to keep things in perspective here, which is, the Orioles are fantastic. They're a really good team up and down. They do not need seismic changes to this roster. I think the roster as it is really good. I do expect them to make some trades in July to reinforce the bullpen and potentially to bring in um, potentially a starting pitcher to, give them some options there because they've already had injuries. They're probably going to have another one at some point. Just that's how the sport goes. So to get somebody else to reinforce the rotation, I think will happen. The lineup though is really good, and I think they're not done there. I would expect Kobe Mayo up at some point, Heston Kjerstad up at some point, and that's another element of this too. Is if Cowser goes to center, I forgot to say Kjerstad is there. I think ready to play some left field. I know the defense isn't going to be great. Maybe you try to pick his spots, or you have Santander DH, and have Kjerstad in right, but then you kind of lose O'Hearn or Mountcastle, which I don't think you really want to do right now. But Kjerstad certainly chomping at the bit to get an opportunity, so that's another element of it too. But I just wanted to keep things in perspective because as good as the Orioles are, the Yankees right now are a little bit better, at least record-wise. I think head-to-head the Orioles maybe have them, but there is still room for improvement, and that improvement can come from within. That yes, I expect them to make trades, but if a guy like Cedric Mullins, who you can basically bet on the type of player he's going to be year after year at this point, it's essentially an average bat, maybe slightly above average. It's not an MVP caliber bat every single year as it was in 2021, but it's an above average bat paired with an excellent glove. And this year we're seeing a horrific bat with just a slightly above average glove. Something's not right there. Something's not computing to me. And I think the Orioles need to slow down, let him get himself right, and kind of go from there. It just doesn't make sense to kind of keep banging your head against the wall. I know I've said that a few times. That's just what it feels like. Is there should be so much more there, and another Mullins at a different level brings these Orioles up to such a degree that it just feels like malpractice to ignore. So I hope there's nothing seriously wrong with him, but like I've said, sometimes it just helps to kind of step back, get some perspective, and slow things down a little bit. And the Orioles can do that for Cedric Mullins this year, and I think that he deserves it. He's been a great servant for this team for years. He's, represented them in all-star games, is really a triumph of two developmental regimes of the organization. First, Dan Duquette and that club, that team for drafting him out of Campbell University relatively low in the draft and getting him to the point of being a big league player. And then Mike Elias and his regime taking him from a struggling big leaguer to an all-star level talent is another triumph on its own. So he's a guy that's just got too much talent. You can't ignore it. And I want to see the Orioles get him right this season because I just feel like the 2024 Orioles won't reach their peak unless they have Cedric Mullins in top form. So they deserve it, or they owe it to themselves. They owe it to Mullins to really figure things out. That's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Like I said, good series in Tampa. Love to get a 4-game sweep. That's huge. Keeping pace with the Yankees, who just keep winning at the top of the division. Now you move on to the Braves, which is another tough team to play. So it's just a lot of fun in Birdland right now. Loving watching the games, and hopefully this team can keep on winning. Before I get out of here, just remind you all to engage with our content on social media at The Warehouse Pod on X and on Threads. You can head over to YouTube and watch the podcast. This one is just kind of me scrolling through some Baseball Savant and Baseball Reference pages, but if you're into that, check us out. Go search the Warehouse Podcast on YouTube. We should pop up as the first one. Give us a subscription there. It's free and it really helps us reach other people. And then if you are listening to us on Spotify or Apple or wherever, please give us the highest possible rating over there if you like what we're doing. Helps us reach more people, helps us get our content out there, and we'd love to just, talk baseball with all you folks. So we have a lot of fun doing it, and it's fun to add more people to the discussion. And then finally, just want to thank our sponsor again, betonline.ag. head over there, get your 50%, what is it? 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Use code BLEAV, believe, and they will hook you up. And yeah, thanks to the Believe Sports Podcast Network. Head over there, and if you're an Orioles fan plus other things, they've probably got a podcast for you. So head over to believe.com and check out all the podcasts over there. But that is all I've got. I appreciate you guys for tuning into my rambling. You are the best. And that's all I've got for now. So thank you so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. I've been Tyler, and we will talk to you next time.